This is a basic pre-deployment checklist for roost logging. This is assuming that the SD card has already been pre-programmed with the proper time use parameters, power use, and the location in decimal degrees. Now at this point the SD card is in it, but it isn't actually pressed in to operate. It's using 2 lithium batteries, which is for 6-month deployments. If you use alkaline batteries, it takes 4, and that is for shorter deployments because they don't last as long, probably 6 weeks or 2 months. Now if you look closely here, you'll see the power switch. The center position is off, the left is for lithiums, the right is for alkalines. Now one of the peculiarities of this is when you're trying to turn the thing on, it doesn't always come on unless you flick it back and forth a couple of times. So for 2 I'm going to go left, right, left, and if it's actually turned on, you'll see a red light flashing on the outside. There it is. So now we can engage the SD card. It's okay to push in the SD card when it's running. It's a really bad idea to disengage it when it's running, so never do that. Always make sure it's turned off before you disengage the SD card. So I'll push it in and you'll see a yellow LED flash. There. That indicates that it's operating. So this will be currently logging. So then you just close it up, shut the buckles, and we can test to make sure that it's working with the magnet. You pass it right beside the LED and you'll see a flash. So it's ready to go. Note on older roost loggers, they do not have the switch inside for turning it on and off and switching between 2 batteries and 4 batteries. They were just designed for 4. If you need to put in 2 lithium batteries, you have to use one of these jumper cables, and these batteries would be removed, lithiums would be there, the jumper cable would go from here to here, like so. So there's our jumper configuration. Make sure you get good attachment to each of those connections. Right now it's disengaged from the SD card, so in theory the red light should be flashing. And there we have it. This is an example of a temperature and humidity logger. In this case it's inside an old style film canister. You can see the lid down there, which has had holes drilled in it to shed water and also allow communication with the outside air. This has baling wire attached to it for hooking onto the ceiling. The reason that kink is in there is to help shed water away from the data logger so it's not running over it. You look inside, you can see the actual logger. It just looks like a little wafer battery, and that logs temperature and humidity for a year. Here's your kit that you need for roost logging. First of all, of course, your roost logger, which should have batteries in it, SD card, magnet attached, protective bag for putting it in. There should also be bubble wrap or some sort of protective foam over the microphone for in transit. Notebook and pencil for keeping notes on everything. Baling wire for attaching the roost logger and the temperature logger if you have one. GPS for locating the cave. Wire cutters for the baling wires. Twist tie material is handy. A couple of notifications, one for the general public and the other is informational for you setting up the logger in the cave. Camera for documenting the proceedings. Watch is handy too. And here's the temperature logger. Just a word on temperature loggers before we go in. Deploying a temperature logger, you're actually trying to log the temperature deep within the cave, ideally near the hibernation site, to get a sense of what sort of temperature and humidity the bats require for their hibernation. So it may not be at the same place as the roost logger. If you put it near the roost logger, it should be at least 1 meter away and not directly in front of it, because it does emit some ultrasonics and it could trip it. Another thing about roost loggers is roost loggers are best deployed at or around corners and passages, because in long passages that are big and straight, bats will often not call. They're probably just picking up the sound of their own wing beats, and they can acoustically detect where they are. So always try and place it around corners. Here we are inside a cave entrance. Now the factors I'm looking at here is there's 2 entrances, one up, one down. So I want to capture both of these entrances with the roost logger. There's wet surfaces in here, and right now they're just a little bit drippy, but at other times there could be a lot of water flowing here which will trip the logger. Also, you might get ice formation, so you don't want to place it near any of these areas. You want to look for something a little drier, like down here. Now, the one mitigating factor is that we only have a 10-meter range on the roost logger, so you want to make sure that you capture anything within that range that the bat can fly by. Down here where it's much drier, we have two possible ways that the bats can enter and leave the cave system from. So we want to capture both of these with the roost logger. So the placement I would be looking at would be somewhere over here. Now, if this was in pack rat territory, like the Rockies or some of the adjacent mountain ranges, you'd want to look at either hanging it up or placing rocks all around it except for in front of the microphone so that you can protect it from chewing, because they will eat the roost logger eventually, as you can see in this picture. Here's an example of a baling wire deployment. It's just run through cracks up there. If necessary, you can jam little rocks in, just chalk it in to hold it in place. Always attach it with more than one point, hopefully so you can maintain its orientation. This one's pointed towards the entrance over there. One thing to consider with any deployment, it's probably unlikely, but it's earthquakes. So make sure that it would withstand some kind of an earthquake. Now in this case, I couldn't find a place to put the baling wire through a crack or a little jug handle, so I elected to put it on the floor. And there it is, hidden right there. Hopefully enough to keep the pack rats from chewing on it. It's a little bit hidden from casual visitors, so that's not a bad deployment. It's aimed at both of the entrances, deeper into the cave, this passage here, and that crawlway there. Now we're going to look at deploying at a larger cave entrance. Now this is a cave that gets quite a bit of human traffic, so we kind of want to hide it. At the same time, it gets very large in here, so you could easily lose the bat calls given that the roost logger only has 10 meters of range. So in this circumstance, we have a fairly sizable but tall entrance leading into a much larger room. Now, it does get some human traffic here, so I would probably put it away from where they tend to travel, which in this case is over to that wall there. Here we have a large pile of boulders. There's the roost logger placement. If I was leaving it here long term, I would try to obscure it by hiding it with rocks. Still, make sure you put your little BatCaver notification beside it, so if somebody does see it, they see an explanation of what it's for, and hopefully we'll leave it alone. Make sure you always either pile up rocks or you affix it to wherever it is so that if anything disturbs it, they're less likely to knock it down. So yes, this is fairly large. I have the detector aimed towards the ceiling where bats are more likely to fly, and also if there's a lot of dripping going on, you're less likely to hear it if it's aimed at the ceiling rather than the floor.